No lizards, no aliens, no nonsense. This is Reality Bytes.
Welcome to Reality Bytes Radio on the 22nd of June 2015. And delighted to have our regular guest Susanne Posel on the line. You there, Susanne?
I'm here. Loud
and clear. Great. Okay, let's just get into it then. I'm not sure if it's yourself I spoke to before about the TSA. It could be somebody else, but we were talking about them stealing money before, and it seems it gets worse. One of your articles here from the 16th of June, employee terrorist ties and 6 more reasons to get rid of the TSA, and it makes a whole mockery of the TSA in terms of what their intended goal is. Do you want to explain this one?
Oh, if this were a sitcom, we would be totally laughing at the TSA. If this were an Adam Sandler movie, we would be laughing. But this is actually happening. They've had 14 years to stop terrorism, and they have 73 employees who have terrorist ties. And it's not just terrorist ties. The Office of the General Inspector, okay, so this is government versus government agency. They found that these 73 individuals have specific government codes that they use to categorize and catalog people in these government terrorist databases. So these people have actual codes next to their name in the government databases as not just hanging out with or maybe once had dinner with terrorists, but actually invited them to the wedding kind of relationship with terrorists. You know what I mean?
Well, absolutely. It's a bit more than just passing them in the street and getting a photograph taken in the same frame, as it were. I mean, the links are there. They're obvious links, and to think that that's who this agency, which has been so discredited for years and years and years, and never caught one terrorist yet, despite all the billions of dollars they've had. And yet they're employing terrorists, basically. Yes,
they are. Literally, they are. It's not. It's funny to me because it's like a Monty Python skit. It's almost like this can't be real. Like you said, they've had plenty of time. They've had plenty of money. They've had plenty of support from the government, regardless of the fact that they have people who steal change, loose change all over the airport, and they pocket it. There's even been mainstream media that set them up with an iPad and put a tracker on it to see if they would steal it, and they did. And when they knocked on the TSA agent's house, he blamed it on his wife. What a douche!
Well, it's a bit more serious than that, because I don't know if you know this, but there's a place in Alabama, and apparently it's the biggest centre for lost luggage in the United States. And there was a little clip on the local radio here, and they were talking about it. And it turns out that all this stuff, there's brand new iPads, all sorts of things, laptop computers, you name it, jewellery, whatever. And it's all apparently lost. And yet, once this stuff goes through the check-in desk, it gets a tag put on it with a barcode. They know exactly who it belongs to. I mean, in terms of security, they have to know who it belongs to, and yet they just steal it and send it to Alabama and sell it.
Yeah. Well, it's the same thing when you go to an auction. When you go to an auction and you buy a car from the police, there's a really good chance that was civil forfeiture. There's almost, you could almost take that to Vegas and bet on it, and I'm not a betting woman, that was seized during civil forfeiture, and you're purchasing a car that was taken from someone. And civil forfeiture is where the police literally steal from you. They say that you have to prove that whatever they took, money, possessions, had nothing to do with what they're accusing it of. Even a house. Here's the funny thing. They sue the house. And the house has to prove that it was not involved in, let's say, drug deals. How does a house that is not sentient, unless you live in Amityville, how is a house supposed to prove itself in a court of law that it had nothing to do with a drug deal?
Well, exactly, and it shows you how bizarre the laws are that protect these thieves, basically. But this place in Alabama, it's massive. I mean, you're talking aircraft hangar kind of size of place, 2 or 3 of them apparently, and as I say, they know who the stuff belongs to, and yet they just keep it. I mean, that's just totally criminal. You put it you take it to the airport, you put it into their care, and they steal it from you.
Don't bring anything to the airport. Don't leave anything behind. If you have to, write a little note on the back of your hand. Don't leave your cell phone behind, your laptop, your wallet, anything. Don't leave any. Make sure that when you put it in your brain, when I'm entering the airport, not only am I going to have to deal with the molestation, but I really have to remind myself not to leave anything behind, because you'll never see it again, and it'll be sold to somebody else.
Yeah, it's biggest belief that they can get away with this kind of stuff, but I guess they're the law, aren't they? But I mean, getting back to the more serious side of it, the terrorism. It says here several, not just one or two, several, at least 73. Were aligned with terrorism-related activity codes associated with their names in a government terrorism database and called them a potential transportation security threat, and they work for the Transport Security Agency. As you say, it's comical if it wasn't so serious. I mean, if they want to do a false flag, I mean, here it is. I mean, there is no security if you're employing terrorists.
Well, the irony just kills me. Here you have a gentleman who is supposed to be protecting you from terrorists, and he's invading your personal space and taking pictures of you with his scanner and touching you in ways you only allow your boyfriend, girlfriend, wife, or husband to touch you. And he's a terrorist himself. And here's another kicker. They had agents go in undercover to test the TSA's ability to find box cutters and things that could be used in a violent way, even your breast milk. Out of 70 attempts, the TSA was not able to find the weapon 67 times. That's incredible. That's terrifying. And then you compound it with the fact that 73 of these TSA agents are known terrorists. And then you combine that with the fact that they are using the scanners incorrectly. If you are of a certain gender persuasion that is attractive to an agent, regardless of their sex, what they've done with some of the males is when you go through the scanner, they hit female. So obviously when the male anatomy shows up in the picture, it shows up as an anomaly. And they're able to then take you and pat you down just because you have, that you're a male. And that's a gross violation of so many things. I can't even begin to talk about the legalities here. How many violations that
Yeah, I wonder what they do with transgenders. I wonder how they get around that one. It's, as you say, like we're dealing with people who are known to be terrorists. I mean, what kind of checks did these people get when they apply for the job? I mean, surely they have to do these kind of security background checks to get a job in a security agency.
You would think, but the TSA constantly admits that they have. It's an evolutionary process. They're still learning. They're still growing. They're still perfecting their background check protocol. No. Look, their purpose, their only point of existence is to stop terrorism. And that should be immediate, like from day one. They should have already gone through all the protocol and see whether or not it works and did all their tests before they were implemented 14 years ago. The fact that it's 14 years later and they're still talking about evolving the process and working out the kinks, that's insane in itself.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in the UK, I don't know what the process is in the States. When you apply for a job, you fill in an application form, etc., and it's got a little bit at the bottom. You know, if you've lied, basically, if you've lied on this application form, it comes to light at a later date, you'll be immediately fired. You know, surely these 73 guys must be fired immediately. And you would imagine taken into custody for getting a job in the TSA as terrorists.
I haven't read anywhere that they've been suspended or fired or even on some sort of administrative leave.
Well, I think anybody going into the airport and dealing with the TSA from now on should ask what ties this person potentially has to terrorist organizations.
Exactly. Yes. Or just drive or get in a boat or take a train. Train rides are lovely.
Yeah, I used to drive. I've driven from Ireland to Bulgaria, and it's 2,500 kilometres from the French, from Calais, which is the first point of entry into France from Britain. And I used to drive it because I just didn't want to go through airports. I was just so sick of it. And at the end of the day, I mean, it costs a little bit more on fuel, but it was a far more pleasant way to go. Yeah,
I think we should just, the other thing is the TSA has agreements with airports. And so the airports want you to continue to fly. And the airlines have investments in the airports as well monetarily. So they're all invested. They really want you to fly. Stop flying.
Well, I did think of this. In the UK, I was trying to get enough people to do it, but of course everybody talks the talk and nobody's willing to do anything. I wanted to get 10 people to dress up as Arabs because there's no law that says you can't wear fancy dress at an airport, and possibly get 10 women to dress up in a hijab, and see how many of them get searched, and then have another 10 people behind them going, hold on a minute, that person should be searched because hey, we all know that Muslims are terrorists, blah 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 blah. And just disrupt the whole process and make the airlines start panicking because nobody's getting on the flights. And they're sitting on the runway paying extra money for not taking off.
It works. It works with lots of companies. And we got to remember that these are just companies. They're just corporations like every other corporation. Their product is facilitating a place for us to take off point for airlines. So, and the airline company, their product is just flying you from point A to point B. So if you think about it in that way, you're just not spending money on their product. Look for a better product. Look for a company that doesn't violate your personal space at the very least. I mean, we don't just let anybody touch us that way. Why would we let a complete stranger, let alone somebody who could be one of these 73 terrorists?
Well, I mean, there was an instance in Ireland, it's a number of years ago now, where a Slovakian had gone through his national airport. I think Bratislava, I think. He'd gone through the airport, and the officials there had planted explosives in his suitcase. And he was allowed to fly. His suitcase went through the security process. He was allowed to get on the plane. And they apparently forgot about the explosives. And they had to phone the Irish authorities, who turned up at his apartment. And it was a Slovakian guy. They turned up at his apartment with the bomb squad, submachine guns, and raided his house to get the explosives off him and charged him with terrorist activity until it was found out that they actually planted them on him. So, I mean, what's to say that one of these 73 employees couldn't be doing the same thing, but doing it for far more nefarious purposes?
There's nothing to say that wouldn't happen. There's lots of instances where the FBI finds a person, talks with them, prepares them, takes them to the hardware store, gets them everything that they need, takes them to an undisclosed location, helps them build it, gets them a sheet of paper and a pencil so they can write their manifesto, helps them write it, stands behind the camera and takes pictures and videos so they can have a little clip they put on YouTube, drives them to the location, and then when it's the bomb does not detonate, then all of a sudden all these FBI agents come out of nowhere around the corner and jump on the guy and, oh, look, we stopped another terrorist plot. That does happen. But it also is real. It actually really does happen too. And I don't think that we should just discount everything as a false flag. Life is not one big false flag. False flags do happen, and manufactured terrorism does happen, but terrorism is actually real. And there are real people out there who really do want to do something incredibly dangerous and serious because of their belief structure. Look what happened in South Carolina. That is racism. Gun reform is not going to change this. And drugs and whatever pharmaceuticals the man was on, that's not going to change this. This gentleman actually believes that black people should die, that the South should rise again, that there should be a secession of southern states from the Union, that they should set up another Confederate states of America and have their own government under a theocratic rule. That is the motivator behind that violent act that he committed. And he's just one of millions of people in this country alone who absolutely 1,000% believe the same way, and if given the opportunity, they might act in a violent way. The real problem that we have is not gun reform and is not even taking, I agree that we should take the Confederate flag down off of the congressional building in South Carolina and everywhere else. I absolutely agree with that. But that's not going to solve the problem. The problem is the ideology. And it's the same thing that's what's going on with the TSA. The problem, and even with terrorists in general, the problem is the way that people think and the way that they justify their thoughts, and that gives them cause to enact the actions or the shenanigans that they're going to pull. That is the actual problem.
Well, I think in terms of these guys at the TSA, I mean, are they there potentially to be used, do you think, in some form or another down the road? Because maybe not now, because 73 of them have been exposed, but potentially there could be 173. We don't know.
Well, the thing about speculation is that there's really no need to speculate. The reality of the TSA is it's a bumbling mess. It's a joke. Over the 14 years, we've caught them doing numerous things that are egregious. The amount of money that our government spends through DHS into its sub-branches, which TSA falls under DHS, Department of Homeland Security, the amount of money we're talking about is so large. These uppers who work in these departments don't want to give that up. Absolutely not. It's worth it to them, and we've seen this over and over again over the last 14 years, where they get exposed for being bumbling idiots or useless or just douchebags, and the government continues to fund them simply because the amount of money flowing on the back end is so great that these people are not going to give up their seat, they're not going to give up their paycheck, and they're certainly not going to give up their bonuses at the end of the year. That's why we have the TSA. I don't see any evidence that they're going to be used in some false flag, because it would have happened already. There's been numerous opportunities over 14 years to do that. But what I do see is greed, financial gain, and millions and millions, hundreds of millions of dollars of taxpayer money being poured into an agency that absolutely does not do anything except violate our rights.
Well, you carry on near the end of the article, talk about the fees that the TSA get from airline tickets. I mean, it's a round trip's $11.20 for every passenger that makes a round trip goes to the TSA. But if you're a terrorist and you can kind of cover your tracks, you can pay $85 over 5 years, and you don't have to do a pat down. I mean, that makes a whole mockery of any type of security. I mean, okay, we don't want a pat down, but they're saying that pat down, is to stop you carrying a gun onto the plane or whatever. But you can pay $85 to get round that. So I mean, it's just about money. I mean, there is no security whatsoever.
Exactly. That is exactly what this is. The TSA is a way to make money for the government at the airports. That's what the evidence is showing me over 14 years. And this pre-check program you're talking about, you're right. It's it's antithetical to the point of the TSA. They shouldn't even have this type of program because their job is to stop terrorism. And this gives the airline passenger the ability to fake who they are and get out of it simply because they paid a fee. And you shouldn't be able to get out of being checked for terrorism because you paid a fee.
Well, even the pre-check information, it's nothing special. I mean, I'm just looking at this. You've got 7 things listed here: name, date of birth, home address, fingerprints, proof of citizenship, immigration documentation, and payment information for verification. I did all that to come into the United States myself. I mean, There's nothing special about this.
Yeah, it's nothing that the U.S. Census Bureau wouldn't have. Look, all of this information you could get off of Intellius, which is a data mining corporation that searches the internet for public records and puts a profile up on everyone and updates it as those public records are updated. So all of this information could be found online. They wouldn't even need very much. I mean, they might need your name, and from there they could get out the rest of this information.
Well, I mean, they've already got it on your passport. Your name and date's on your passport. Your proof of citizenship's on your passport. If you're coming in as an immigrant, as I was, I've got a visa to come in. The payment information, they've got that. Fingerprints to take off you when you come in, and your home address is on your booking reference.
Right, and if you've ever been arrested or anything like that, back in the 80s, everybody with the DARE program when I was a kid, we all had our fingerprints taken and pictures taken of us. And so that, like we're talking about, all this information could be had by the TSA simply by just having your first, middle, and last name. That's all they would need. They could get all of this information themselves. And like you're saying, you provide this information when you're going through the protocol to get on the airplane anyway, especially if you're on an international flight. So ridiculous. It's a money-making scheme. That's all it is. That's really what it boils down to. That's all it is. And that unto itself is egregious. And that should be enough for people, in my opinion, to boycott flying. As long as the airlines and the airports are putting up with this, and they actually have fought back against the TSA, and I think it was 2 years ago, they were refusing to have TSA agents in certain airports across the United States because of this stupidity and the complaints by passengers. And one of the major contributors to their blowback to the government was that people weren't flying as much, and airlines were having to either reduce their flights, reduce their employees, or close down. So listen, folks, it will work. Our dollars actually work. They work for something, and what they work for is putting corporations in business or out of business. So stop flying. Stop flying. And the airlines and the airports will get together again like they did 2 years ago and go back against the government with the TSA. And when that starts happening, don't start flying again once you see these articles in the news and you hear all this chatter. Keep going. Stop, don't, with your boycott on flying, keep it going all the way to the end when the NASDAQ shows that they can't even give away their stocks to penny stock purchasers.
Yeah. Well, I mean, at the end of the day, they know who you are as soon as you walk into the airport terminal. Facial recognition, whatever, they know who you are. I mean, there's no need for them to be patting you down and checking you out. They know you're, whatever, Joe Bloggs plumber, lives at such and such an address, goes out for a drink on a Saturday, whatever. They know he's not a terrorist. So there's no need for any of this rubbish. But anyway, moving on to France and Monsanto. Now, of course, Roundup was in the news recently as being potentially, they said, carcinogenic. And what I noticed here in the States immediately was all the ads for Roundup on the TV suddenly appearing to try and get people still to buy it. Now, it seems that France has banned Monsanto's Roundup for home gardens, but not entirely, because apparently you can still ask for it over the counter. It's just not going to be on the shelves. Is that correct?
No. That's not correct. They have told everyone to, it's not going to be available for sale in their Lowe's or Home Depot or whatever their equivalency is in France. It's not going to be available for the public to sell, to purchase. Industry can still purchase it. And that's usually corporations buy it directly from Monsanto or their branch subsidiaries. So the corporations who use Roundup or the herbicides from Monsanto will still be able to purchase it. It's just citizens in France will not be able to purchase it.
Sorry, I muted my mic there. Okay, the industry can still buy it in vast quantities, of course. And it's not for consumers, but I mean, of course, we're all consumers of it if industry's using it. So, I mean, what difference does that really make? I mean, if they're still spraying it on the corn and whatever, we're still going to get it, aren't we?
Absolutely. the responsible thing that I think that the French government did in this instance was recognizing that it has carcinogens in it, and that it has been shown to, especially over cumulative later in life, causing cancer to develop in many different forms. And if you have a home garden, it's antithetical to spray a chemical herbicide on your garden, because you started this garden because you don't want to go to the grocer and buy the produce from them because it's got pesticides and herbicides on it and it's GMO. You're growing this natural food because you want to eat natural food. It's retarded for you then to go put a chemical herbicide on it to keep bugs off of it. That doesn't make any sense. And so the government of France has made this decision that if you're going to have a home garden, you shouldn't be doing this. And yes, we all have the sovereign freedom to do whatever we want. If we want to eat at McDonald's every single day and die of complications of obesity, then we should be able to, as sovereign citizens, be able to do that to ourselves. And in the same respect, if you want to use Monsanto, you should be free to do it. But in this instance, the government has said that it in the long run, it costs too much to people. And since what they're dealing with is conscious people, they have home gardens. Even though industry is using it, they're not buying from industry, obviously, because they have a home garden. So they're talking to the people who already know that when they go to the grocer, they're going to get this covered in chemical crap food. So they're not buying it to begin with. This, to me, is one instance where government is actually doing the right thing and being responsible. Not that I agree with everything that France ever did, but in this one instance, I think that this is government doing the right thing.
It's interesting to see that the only mention in the product Roundup, if you like. I mean, and as you mentioned in the article, it's this glyphosate is in many different herbicides. So I mean, they can't ban them all. They're only kind of going after the one that's kind of well known.
Well, that starts a trend. When you're dealing with multinational corporations, you can't just all of a sudden, as a government agency, you can't just all of a sudden ban all of them. The government and these corporations have contracts and deals, and those contracts are enforceable, even in international tribunal courts right now. You know, we're talking about the TPP, setting up these tribunal courts. The courts are already in place. It doesn't matter. I mean, we'll talk about the tribunal courts when we get to the cloned meat. So they're bound legally. They can't just go ahead and do this. But what they're doing is setting a trend. So today it's Monsanto, tomorrow it's Dow, the next day it's whatever corporation. And through this trend, they will be able to, if they're going to use this as a trend, I hope that they do. I'm not saying that they are. But if they were going to use this as a trend, then over the course of maybe 10 years, they would be able to get out of contracts that they're in without being sued. Because if they're taken to international tribunal court, the taxpayers are going to pay to reimburse the government for the cost of the lawsuit and the money damages that they would owe that corporation. These things are really, really complicated, and it's not just as easy as shutting everything down in a corporation. The good thing is that the consumers, the people, don't have the restrictions. They're not in business with these corporations. They don't have contracts that they have to honor. They don't have to search for loopholes to get out of contracts and maybe even take a hit in a international tribunal court. We can just stop purchasing the product. We can put the company out of business, which makes the contract less desirable to the business, to the governments that are in business with them, and thereby give them a little bit of leeway to get out of these contracts. Everything is connected, and it's all cyclical. But what it really boils down to is customer sentiment, and that's all it's ever boiled down to. The corporations only exist because we patronize them. It's not just the huge multi-billion-dollar deals that these corporations have with governments. It's also us, because the government is supplying this product into our countries because we're going to purchase them. Well, if they set up these billion-dollar deals and whatnot, and we're not purchasing the product when it enters our market, then they're going to get out of the contract. They're going to say, nobody's purchasing the product, we're not getting the return that you promised. we're going to sue to get out of the contract. And then you start to see these corporations go out of business and die away. And I think that at every level, whenever we talk about these things, we have to remember every day when we go to the store, we're deciding whether or not these companies live or die. And if we don't like them, then just don't buy their products.
Yeah, talking about the effects of this stuff, they've banned it because it's potentially carcinogenic, and it's been found in the blood and urine of the agricultural workers. I mean, what kind of comeback are they going to have in the future if they develop cancer? Do you think there's going to be a lot of cases coming forward now where agricultural workers who've been exposed to this are going to sue these companies?
Well, with the IARC's report, they have standing to do so. They could use that report in conjunction with other scientific studies with glyphosates and actually enter a courtroom and sue a company to get the benefits that they need to pay back for any medical that they incur. Because remember, this is over time. This is cumulative. And these workers are not necessarily even in the field while it's being sprayed. But because the skin, your epidermis, is so porous, they just have to be in the field where it was sprayed recently, and the molecules are still in the air, and they're still breathing it in, and they're still getting it on their skin. And over time, working at a corporation or in a field for 10 or 12 or 15 years, 20, 30 years later, you're going to develop cancer. And you might not be thinking that it was that job that you worked in the field for this big agro corporation, but it absolutely was. And with studies like this gives those people legal standing in order to sue corporations for damages.
Well, hopefully they will, and take some of these corporations with them. Okay, you mentioned cloned meat there, and kind of sticking with the same topic. House repeal of meat labelling could flood the US food supply with clones. I think a similar thing happened in the UK many, many years ago with Argentinian beef. It was after the Falklands War, as they called it, and I think this was kind of a conciliatory thing to Argentina to allow the beef to come in without all the checks and balances and stuff that were supposed to be imposed on UK meat. And all this Argentinian stuff came in, and no testing done whatsoever, no labelling, and nobody knew where it came from. Are we going down the same road here?
This is actually comical because Canada and Mexico sued the United States in an international tribunal court over discrimination because the United States didn't want to buy meat from them because there was a possibility that it wasn't natural, that it was cloned. So they sued them and won, and now the United States has to do business with them. And this is how that stuff works. See, lots of people get upset, oh my God, Obama's letting cloned meat into the country. Understand the process and understand what's happening. Understand what's going on. He's not allowing it. He's forced to by international mandate. So if you're going to get angry at somebody, get angry at the World Trade Organization, get angry at Canada and Mexico for suing the United States to allow this potentially cloned meat to come into our meat supply. At least put the blame where it's due.
Well, of course, so it goes back over many decades with different presidents signing different treaties, and as you say, it's not just the current one that's to blame, but in the future he'll be to blame for the treaties he's signing now, I guess. But yeah, I mean, cloned meat. Does the US export cloned meat? Do you think? No,
I haven't seen any evidence that we're exporting the cloned meat.
Well, you would think that in terms of treaties that have been signed in the past, they should have written them a bit better to stop this kind of thing happening. But of course, maybe it's just a slip up or a mistake or whatever, or it could be deliberate. Who knows?
Well, no. When treaties are signed, they're signed at the time that they're signed, and this technology has advanced past the treaty, and so it's impossible for them to add into a treaty that they're signing because the other side would not agree to that. The possibility that it's somewhere in the near distant past or near distant future rather that they're going to have cloned meat. So something that was signed back in the 80s or the 70s or even the early 90s would not have foreseen that this was happening, because that wasn't even a technological possibility. What they're doing, and this is disgusting, I really want to talk about this for a second. What they do is they take cells from the dead carcasses of animals, and it's called resurrected animals. Okay, so they'll take like a piece of an ear and mince it up in the lab, and then use the cells in a petri dish to separate everything out and get the cells to forget that they're skin cells and start to express all of their genes. Once they do that, they add a donor egg to it, zap it with some electricity, and bam, you have a resurrected animal. And they grow these animals and raise them alongside natural animals.
It's like a Frankenstein movie, isn't it?
It is.
They used electricity to bring this creature back to life, and here we have it.
Exactly. And they look just like regular cows, but they are genetically their grandfather. And so they do all of these tests to make sure that they are viable, but with the cloning process, they still have problems like deformities and enlarged umbilical cords, respiratory distress, heart and intestinal problems from the animal themselves. And it just got me thinking, the big thing about antibiotics and hormones in the chicken is that it translates to the human once they eat it. So if these clones have difficulty in the, quote, reprogramming process when they're resurrected, and this is 90% of clones, by the way, it's not just a couple of them, like, a handful. 90% of these clones come out with these problems. One of the problems is enlarged offspring syndrome. And I just remember lots of mothers giving birth to really big babies over the last 2 years, 14 pounds, 10 pounds seems to be the average, 15, 20 pounds. I'm wondering if we are expressing, just like we do with the hormones, where women develop large hips and large thighs, just like the chickens do. Maybe we're having larger offspring simply because we're ingesting meat that has been cloned and we don't know it. And that's one of the symptoms of 90% of these clones to begin with. Maybe they're genetically passing it down to us.
Well, that was always the argument with genetically modified crops as well, that the genes still kept changing even after, they didn't have the food chain, and they didn't really know what they did after that, and there was no kind of tests done or anything. And I've always thought that if you eat genetically modified food, you're going to be genetically modified. And that's basically what we're talking about here as well.
Absolutely.
Which
the problem with all of these things, and I know that people are going to argue with me about this, but the real big problem is that we don't have any specific long-term studies on the absolute effects of genetically modified organisms on humans. There's never been a study. There have been studies to show on animals, and because these animals are maybe 98% genetically tied to us like rats or mice, that the assumption is that it would translate pretty much the same to a human. But there's never been like a 10-year study or 20-year study on the effects of genetically modified organisms specifically on humans. But what we see in the animal world when we experiment is egregious and disgusting. And it's obvious that if they're so genetically connected to us, that we would have similar, if not the same, effects. But I would really like it if somebody would, finally do a study so we can have definitive proof. This is exactly what happens when humans consume genetically modified organisms.
Well, we had the Minister for the Environment, believe it or not, in the UK, demanding that genetically modified crops be allowed to be grown in the UK, despite there's apparently been a European ban. But I think Spain it is that exports most of the genetically modified food in the European Union. But they also voted against having it in their own cafeterias, of course. So I mean, if these guys want to push this kind of stuff, well, I would suggest Congress and the House of Parliament in the UK actually spend 10 years eating this stuff themselves, and then come back to us and say, yeah, it's perfectly safe, if they can get out the door to tell us. I guess that is, Well,
boomers grew up in a time where this technology was just starting, and it was it was exciting and it was experimental and everybody believed that it was going to be the wave of the future. And those boomers are still in power today in Congress. I think it's going to take a couple of generations once the millennials are old enough to get into Congress and the House, and on the state level as well in senatorial seats. I think then, because millennials are obviously aware, they're the ones protesting out there, standing out in the streets the most against genetically modified organisms. So it might be as soon as maybe 20 years from now, where millennials are old enough to hold seats in office, that we might actually see some bills and changes being made.
Right, but of course, by that time it could be too late. I mean, the stuff's going to be out there, and we know that genetically modified crops contaminate other crops, and I wonder what happened if these cloned animals bred. I mean, is there any studies on that?
I did not find any information on their viability for their fertility viability, but over a blanket statement. They're not viable. They're not fertile. When they're cloned, they're not fertile. But I did not find any specific information that these animals are not able to procreate.
Okay. Of course, the big argument with this is, this will help feed the world. The same thing they told us with genetically modified crops. And yet, there was an article in the Guardian back in 2011, July, which stated, the UN stated that Africa could feed the world. Using current agricultural methods. So why do we even need all this stuff in the first place if Africa itself can feed the world and yet Africa's starving?
Because Africa is not the client that they're feeding. Africa's not buying the food. They're just selling it. They're just growing it. The African people don't get the benefit because the United Nations and corporations, through land grabs and public-private partnerships, and even governments in the continent of Africa and in the countries, are siding with these corporations to give them land to grow this food. So the government gets a little bit of cash off of the sale, but the people are not able to eat because it's not grown for them. It's grown for China. It's grown for the UK. It's grown for Australia or the United States.
Yeah, but my point was that the UN itself has said that Africa can feed the world, and I think Mexico could feed, or South Latin America could feed another half of the world as well if it was allowed to develop. That was the point I was making. That there's no need for us to go down the road of genetically modified food or cloned meat to feed the world if we just stuck to ordinary farming methods and let the likes of Africa and the poorer Latin countries develop,
Well, sure. And the ironic part of it is that they are. Minute Maid, the Coca Cola Corporation, their Bill and Melinda Gates went in there as well with some land purchasing for corporations, food manufacturers that they work with. That is actually happening. It's just the benefit of it is not going to the African people. Their own water is being siphoned out to them, and they have to get credits and swipe a little card in order to get a gallon of water from a public water source, from their own water source. And yet it's cheaper for them to buy a bottle of Coca Cola at 2.5 ounces or whatnot than it is for them to swipe a card and get a gallon of water. That's the problem.
Well, I mean, that says it all, really, doesn't it? They don't want them drinking water, I guess. Just Coca Cola. Okay. Different topic entirely for the last 15 minutes or so. Why are Americans getting new chip cards? Follow the money. Now, I recently went into the bank here, Wells Fargo, and my card was the strip on the back was wearing out and stuff. I'm sure that's deliberate as well. And I went in and I got this new one through the post with a chip in it. I never asked for it. They just sent it out automatically. So you mentioned that some of the bigger banks are doing this as well, just changing people's cards over to this thing. And that retailers are basically going to be forced into accepting them.
Oh, the retailers have called for it. The National Retail Federation called for it. They wrote a letter to Harry Reid back and John Boehner back last year and said that we need to have chip to pin. Everyone else in the world has chip to pin. America needs to go chip to pin as well.
In terms of the smaller retailers are going to be forced into paying for this technology for their cash registers and stuff. I mean, it's going to put a lot of them out of business, surely.
Well, I don't think if that amount of money puts you out of business, then your business was in bigger trouble than it was before they did the chip-to-pin. It's not a huge amount of money to switch over for corporations. You know, it's just a matter of buying a new apparatus to swipe the card with, and that would be a couple of $100s. We're not if that breaks your corporation, then your corporation was failing.
Well, I wasn't talking about corporation. I was talking about the man, the corner shop or whatever.
Yeah, but they're corporations. Everybody's even a small business is still a corporation.
Yeah, I understand that, but in terms of scale, you know, it could be a lot of money to some folk. But anyway, the reason for this, of course, is to go down the road of the cashless society, which I think is it Finland, which is one of the proponents of this. I mean, they're nearly there, or Sweden, I'm not sure. It's one of the Scandinavian countries anyway, who are one of the big, you know, experimental hubs for this. I mean, do you see Americans down the road not using the greenback?
We're already not using greenback. Millennials love not having to carry cash on them. They'll even swipe a card at Starbucks for $5. We're already there. Bitcoin and lots of other cryptocurrencies are now legal tender in the state of California. So businesses and everyone else can use it just like they use their dollars. It's not totally there because, like, I still carry cash. I only pay in cash. But maybe in 20 years I won't have that option to do that because it won't be viable for a business to accept cash.
Well, I actually went into a bank in Ireland a number of years ago, and they refused to take cash, a bank. And I said, well, you're not a bank anymore, are you? You can't accept cash. Why not? So we just changed our systems. It's all electronic now. And that was a bank. I mean, where'd you go when you've no cash? I mean, it's absurd. I mean, people can't grasp the seriousness of it, that they'll have no control over their lives, basically, because, you know, we all have cards that fail. You go to the store, you try and buy something. If you try to use a car for gas or something, and the card doesn't swipe, whatever, you've got to find another method of payment. But of course, they're bringing in all these things to say it's far more secure, and yet, you know, whenever they say this, some hacker comes up and say, well, actually, no, it's not. You know, I can sit in my car with a little laptop and I can steal that person's money from, you know, 100 yards away, or whatever. They can't steal your cash off you from 100 yards away.
And that's the biggest problem. The truth of the matter is, the major banks, and there was a study that was done last year, and I reported on it. The major banks have not implemented or paid for the infrastructure to secure themselves from hackers. And I'm talking about J.P. Morgan and Bank of America and all those big names, Wells Fargo. They're not paying the money, so they're easily hackable. And to go to a more stringent digital system just means that more and more customer information and bank accounts are open toward being hacked. It's not that it's less hackable now, because the hackers are proving it time and time again that they're able to get in and without the security in place, just a simple firewall, you know, just a subscription to, like, let's say Kaspersky Lab for a security breach. They don't even pay for that. And yet these banks and the American Banking Association is pressuring Congress right now to pass a cybersecurity bill, because otherwise hackers are going to be able to get into their system using a virus and take all of our money out of our accounts, and there's just nothing that they will be able to do about it. That sounds to me like self-serving prophecy.
Well, yeah. And of course, you know, we're all we're getting fed this stuff about, oh, you can just swipe your mobile phone and all this kind of stuff. And but I mean, people lose. I mean, especially young people, they tend to go through mobile phones like, you know, I'll have a glass of soda or something, or a glass of water, you know. And they've got one phone this month, and we talked about this before. They've got the upgrade 6 months down the line, and, you know, and they lose them or break them or whatever. I mean, if that's your only way of paying for things, and you break it, you're screwed.
Well, that is true. But to me, the bigger thing is the concept of what money is, because that's really what we're talking about. When we're talking about the cashless society, what we're really talking about is we're changing the way that we conceive or perceive what money is and how it is able to be exchanged. And so far we have had a physical system where we can see the money, we can count it, we can hold it in our hands, we know how much we have. And a paper system of receipts to prove that the bank has the amount of money, the physical cash that we just handed them. Now everything is going digital and technology is taking over. And so the definition of what money means and how it's exchanged is changing, but it's not clear to everyone the actual system that is going to replace the physical representation that we've been using for so many centuries. That is, to me, the most terrifying part of it, simply because there's no transparency. And the push for it in lots of circles, I mean, you don't just have Bill Gates talking about how Bitcoin is amazing and, California saying it's legal tender, but you also have lots of people who own brokerage firms for cryptocurrency and lease out 4 different patents for cryptocurrency saying that you should be getting Bitcoin. And even people who are talking out against cashless society, when you go on their website, they're accepting Bitcoin. And that's alternative media. So there's a lot of confusion as to it. What is it? Where is it going? What is its purpose? Is it safe? If alternative media is accepting it as a form of legal tender, then why are we complaining about cashless society? What would be the problem? Because mainstream is for it, and if alternative outlets are using it, then there should be no problem with cashless society or using cryptocurrency, and we shouldn't be complaining about it. But there's inherent question about the who, what, where, when, why, and how that is not being answered by any of the agencies that are utilizing it, the governments, the banking industry, including mainstream and alternative media. So everyone's confused as to where we're supposed to stand on this, and are our rights being violated? How are they being violated? If cryptocurrency is bad, why is it accepted for donations or for purchasing on our alternative media websites? The whole thing is just absolutely confusing to people.
Yeah, I'm kind of very cynical about the whole Bitcoin revolution, if you want to call it that, and the fact that it is an electronic currency, a cashless currency, if you like. And I don't know what it's all about, really. It's been promoted, as you say, in the mainstream and the alternative media. It's just the next best thing, and I'm very dubious about people who push it as the solution to all our monetary woes and pushing us towards a cashless society, which previous to Bitcoin, those in the alternative media would have said is a bad thing. I just don't understand it.
Absolutely. It's confusing to me as well. It would be like saying the Bilderberg Group is bad, but we're going to have a bunch of their attendees to the meetings on our shows, and we're going to talk about all of their talking points. That would be antithetical. That doesn't make any sense. It's the same thing with cryptocurrencies. Either it's a bad thing, and we shouldn't be supporting it, and the alternative media shouldn't be using it, or it's not so bad, or it could be a good thing, and we just have the wrong perception of it. So how could we be sold on an idea that cryptocurrency and digital currencies are bad when the people who are saying that it's bad are using it? That just doesn't make any sense to me. But that's why I don't accept cryptocurrency, and that's why I don't use it myself, and I'm not invested in any of it. Because I do think it's a bad idea. Because our banking system, our financial system is not secure against hackers. And it's not just always nefarious purposes. It's hackers in the general are trying to prove a point, that it is hackable, that you're not secure. This is how I'm exposing your insecurity. Get your act together. When it comes to our financial economic institutions, we absolutely have to have knowledge, not faith, knowledge that they are securing themselves. The proof is that they're not. So they're opening themselves up to get hacked and yet pushing for more use of digital currency, which leads to less security on their end and more abilities for hackers to come in, not just the guys proving a point, but also nefarious people who want to use your identity, rack up bills, and let you go to court and figure out how to prove that you didn't do it.
Yeah. I mean, it reminds me of the movie Enemy of the State. Where the guy's just completely shut off from his his life basically using electronic methods. Where he goes to the bank to try and get money out, he can't get it. He goes to the hotel to try and book in, he can't use his card. Nothing works for him. I mean, individuals could be targeted through this. I mean, if the government was to, you know, people like yourself or myself or somebody else who they deem is a threat to something or other, exposing terrorists at the TSA, whatever, they could turn your card off, and that's it.
They could, but the most wonderful thing, I'll go back to the hackers. The most wonderful thing is the hackers. The hackers could prove that you were being targeted because they don't have security systems in place, even our governments, even the FBI and the CIA. They were just hacked by hackers a couple of years ago. All of the FBI and the Pentagon, the Department of Energy, they were all hacked. So it wouldn't be hard for the hackers to find information to siphon out to prove that you were being targeted. The main issue for me is the lack of security by the corporations and the governments, and yet calling for cybersecurity to control the hackers, simply because hackers are showing that they are not secure. And so if we are moving toward a digital financial way of being, we have to have even more exorbitant securities, because this is new frontier, this is new terrain. And of course, you know, Joe Plumber down the street does not want to have to pay his rent and then or online banking and find out that he doesn't have any money in his account. So the self-serving prophecy of the businesses is just to have laws passed to protect them later on in the future when it comes to the hackers that are bothering them today. It's antithetical for corporations or even governments to shut people off in general. You know, this is not like that, like they're just going to like choose people and shut you off because you said something on Twitter or on Facebook. That's because corporations use your money in order to live. So if they just shut off a large number of people, they're cutting themselves off from a large amount of profits. It's the same thing going back with the meat and Canada and Mexico. They're losing massive amounts of money by the United States not purchasing their meat. So they took them to court in order to force them to do that. Corporations are not going to cut off potential customers from purchasing products, and governments are not going to cut off the general public from, like, let's say, paying their taxes if everything's digital and you have to do it all online. They're not going to do that to themselves. It's cutting their nose to spite their face. However, because we're all moving to a digital society, so are other criminals and other entities as well. And they're getting better at committing cyber crimes than they are just going down to the bank and having a robbery. I mean, we still hear about people going down to the bank and robbing, but we hear more about people hacking into corporations and agencies and siphoning out information and then selling that on the black market and using that through as a means to make money. And that is where we're headed. So since it's all through the cloak of being on the internet, not actually turning on your 6 o'clock news and seeing some guy with a gun at a bank robbing the bank, that stuff just doesn't happen very much anymore, because it's moving to this veil of the internet and being able to be anywhere and use mirror algorithms to hide exactly where your IP address is coming from and be able to get into 500, 600 Target stores all at once and siphon information from the POS system. That is a whole new frontier. And that's where we should be concerned. I don't think so much that the government's going to shut us off and that we're going to be broke and homeless and all of that. I think more that we should be concerned about the security of what we have even today, and not worrying about some far distant dystopian future that may or may not happen. It makes a lot of money for Hollywood, and it sells books, and it's great. But the reality is the hackers are in there now, and the ability for cyber criminals to get in there it's almost as easy as walking into a room and just taking what you want, but you're doing it digitally. So we need to push for them to pay the money, the infrastructure, to have these securities in place, or like I've been saying the whole time, get your money out of the bank. And the more accounts that close in these banks, the more that they will be forced to, like Diet Pepsi taking aspartame out, they'll be forced to pay the infrastructure to make sure that they're secure, just to get their customers back.
Well, just to round up, it was, we talk about ISIS being one of the most well-funded terrorist organisations on the planet, and they're worth billions apparently, and they're selling oil and all sorts of things. They can't seem to find their money electronically. And the TSA, I guess it'll give those guys a pay cut if we go cashless. I suppose there's one good side to it. There'll be no loose change in the tray for them to steal.
That's right.
So with that, we'll finish off, and it's been a pleasure again, and thanks for coming on, giving us your time.
Yes.
Okay, we'll speak to you again in a month or so.
Awesome.
Okay, thanks very much again. Cheers.
No lizards, no aliens, no nonsense. This is Reality Bytes.